I will give you my own personal welcome as well to this event. For the bicentenary of the birth of the Bab, I don't think I need the microphone. I think it's a small enough room, you can probably hear me. So this is where we commemorate 200 years from the point at which the Bab, who was the forerunner of the Baha'i faith, was born. As with all good presentations, I have to tell you about my disclosures. I have none. Maybe one day I will. I'm a local resident of Concord. I live up near Jalil Afnan with my family and 3 boys. And I'm a member of the local community. I also made a grave error. So once every Baha'i month, which is every 19 days, and I'll get to that a little bit later, we were discussing about a year ago what we would do in anticipation of this event. And I said, well, wouldn't it be a good idea? And the feast is constructed in 3 parts. There are prayers, administrative portion where you discuss the affairs of the community, and then closing social portion. So during the administrative portion, I said it would be a good idea if on a regular basis between now, which is about a year ago, and then, which is now, we would have someone give a little bit of a presentation about the Bab so we could think about it. And the immediate response was, well, you should do that. So I realized I created the trap and my leg was firmly trapped in it. So here I am. That was the error I made. It was a rookie error. It's almost impossible, frankly, to condense within the next 20 minutes or so the very lofty goals that Monette set me as she introduced me, which was really what I asked her to say. But what I will attempt to do in 3 parts is to address the Bab, first and foremost. Second, to talk about humanity. And third, this notion of our physical and spiritual reality. So, the Bab. So the journey begins in 1819, October the 20th, in Shiraz, which you can see is demarcated with a little red spot, south-central Iran, or Persia, as it was known there. And his birth name was Sayyid Ali Muhammad. The Bab, which means gate, and you can see that with the Arabic letters at the top left, was a title that he then became known by later on, once he declared his mission. Sayyid, because he was a descendant of Muhammad. So anyone who is a Muhammad descendant is known as Sayyid, as a mark of respect. So Sayyid Ali Muhammad. In fact, his ancestry can date back to what is known as the House of Hashim, which is an Abrahamic descent through Ishmael, son of Abraham. It's a very interesting genealogy if you look into it. So Shiraz, what can I tell you a little bit about Shiraz? It was one of the oldest cities in Persia, 4,000 years old, known as the cultural capital of Iran. It's renowned for its poetry, its literature, the crafts and gardens, and was an economic center of southern Iran. In fact, the Bab's family were merchants, and they would trade as part of the trading route through Shiraz. Here is the mausoleum of Sa'di, who was a very famous 13th century poet and thinker. And he produced 2 major works revolving around the virtues that were recommended to Muslims at the time. The behaviors that were expected, the justice, the ability to kind of conduct yourself appropriately, the way in which you should reflect on life. So this is the mausoleum of Sa'di. And also in Shiraz is the tomb of Hafez, who was another very famous Persian poet. Hafez actually had memorized the Quran at a very early age, in addition to works of Rumi and other poets. And he was something of a mystic and post-14th century Persian writings. And you can see a little bit of the architecture even of his tomb. And this is a picture of the main bazaar in Shiraz. And you can get a sense, if you've been to a bazaar like this, perhaps in Istanbul, of the kind of the concept of the trading and the markets that were present. And this is a building that would have been present at the time of the Bab. But switching our attention a little bit to more spiritual matters, since this evening is more about that, a mosque, the Vakil Mosque, which was present at the time of the Bab, and which he would have been able to go into and pray in. And it forms a very simple kind of structure. There's typically a courtyard and a watering pool in the middle, and then these arches. And what is renowned about the Iranian mosques in particular, because they were forbidden from hanging pictures or paintings, is they would use the artistry of tile, and they would use colors and the tiling patterns to create a piece of beauty within the building. And this is an example of the roof of that mosque with its incredible tiling detail. Again, several hundred years old. Another mosque to show you an example of is this Nasr al-Mulk Mosque. Now, this was a little bit later on in the Qajar dynasty, a little bit afterwards in the late 1800s, and is known as the Pink Mosque, which is fabled for its kind of very gorgeous pink tiling. And this is the ceiling of that mosque. So these were the environments in which the Bab grew up, this kind of trading city, this environment which was renowned for its culture, for its environment, for its literature, for its art. As a young child, the Bab's father passed away while he was still in his infancy, and he was raised by his maternal uncle. When he went to school, after a very short period of time, even as a young boy of 6 or 7, his school teacher, Sheikh Abi, brought the Bab home to his uncle at one point and said, "There is nothing I can teach him." And the uncle was a little bit perturbed and was concerned that the Bab had been misbehaving at school. And in reality, his teacher said, "He verily stands in no need of teachers such as I." He recognized within him a gift. He said that he was dignified and serene. He was handsome. He cared little for the pastimes of other boys. And some mornings he was late coming to school, and when asked where he was, he said quietly, "I was in the house of my grandfather." And he was referring to praying in the mosque, and his grandfather being the Prophet Muhammad. I will not dwell on the life of the Bab. It takes, this event can do no justice to that. But to say that probably the most significant event was his declaration. And this is where he announced that he was the promised one. This occurred on the 22nd of May in 1844. And Mullah Hussein, who was a pupil of a man named Sayyid Kazem Rashdi, had traveled across Iran with his brother and nephew, venturing to Shiraz. They started in Iraq, in Karbala, at the top, and they progressed to Najaf, Bandar, and ultimately came to Shiraz. At the time, this was the entrance gate to Shiraz, so this is where they would have arrived. And they were not sure necessarily why they came to Shiraz. They felt drawn to the city. On their arrival, Mullah Hussein asked his companions to leave him, and he would accompany them later in the mosque. He then stood by the gate of the city and was approached by a young man who at the time was 24 years old, and that young man was the Bab. And the Bab welcomed him to the city of Shiraz and showed great love and kindness to him, invited him to his home so that he could rest from his journey and he could be refreshed. Mullah Hussein accompanied the Bab to his home, and this is the image that was playing on the screen behind. This was actually the photograph of the house of the Bab in Shiraz. And during that fateful night, he proclaimed his mission. But he did it in such a way that Mullah Hussein was trying to test him and had been told by his teacher there are specific things that whoever claims to be this individual will need to do. One of which was to explain a complicated surah of the Quran. Before asking the Bab began to explain this surah, and Mullah Hussein was taken aback. And he didn't stop describing this surah until he was completely finished several hours later. At which time Mullah Hussein realized, my companions, I was supposed to meet them at sunset at the mosque. And the Bab replied to him, "I'm sure you said, if God wills it," because that's how people speak in those countries. And he said, "Yes, I did." And he said, "God did not will it." He said, "I am the primal point from which have been generated all created things. I am the countenance of God, whose splendor can never be obscured, the light of God, whose radiance can never fade." And this is the same gate in modern-day Shiraz. It was reconstructed after earthquake damage, and they used to house 2 Qurans in a small room that's above the arch to protect passing people that were traveling through the city and on their onward journey. So that was the Bab. Humanity. I will preface this by a quote from the Bab, which I think is very telling. Knowledge is 20 and 7 letters. All that the prophets have revealed are 2 letters thereof. No man thus far hath known more than these 2 letters. But when the Qa'im, the promised one, shall arise, he will cause the remaining 20 and 5 letters to be made manifest. Now we think we are pretty clever. We live in a very clever part of a very clever country. We have a lot of technology at our disposal. We have, typically in our pockets, presumably silenced right now, more tech on our phones than what took the first Apollo missions up into space. It's incredible. But it wasn't always this way. It really wasn't that long ago in the overall history of the Earth that we were living in caves, fighting off fierce animals, trying to cook our meats with no understanding of science and technology and the arts, with very rudimentary techniques. Out of interest, I just kind of compiled a list of some early discoveries that we made as humanity. And typically, up to about the 1800s, they revolved around devices that we could use for steering, for mobility, for measuring temperatures. And then from about the 1800s onwards, there was quite a shift in how our discoveries took hold, including the generator from Faraday, the tires from Goodyear, Morse's telegraph, I'll get back to that in a second, pasteurization, concrete, electric lamps, gas-powered engines, X-rays for modern technology and imaging. Very interestingly, Samuel Morse's technology of the telegraph was tested on May 24, 1844. And they had to decide what they would use as the first sentence to transmit. This was a very dramatic thing in human history, and occurred coincidentally after the Bab had declared his mission halfway around the world. And the patent agent, the daughter of the patent agent, Annie Owen, said, why don't you use this verse from the Bible, Numbers 23:23, what hath God wrought? And so that was the first telegraph ever sent. So here we are in the Concord Museum. I'm just about beginning to pronounce Concord right. It's fitting that a red coat should be here in the midst of all the press. But it's fine. So Concord has a rare history, and we have some interesting spiritual forebears. We have the Walden Pond image there. We have the North Bridge where those first shots were heard. We have a high school picture. But very interestingly, in the 1800s, specifically in the mid-1800s, in Concord, we had a congregation of individuals who I will just mention briefly, including Louisa May Alcott, whose descendants are in the room today, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and William Ellery Channing. And these individuals were great thinkers. They were part of what was known as a transcendentalist movement. They would go home and study Hindu texts. They believed in nature. They were abolitionists. They were very much in keeping with the spirit of the age. They were tapping into spiritual powers which had been released in Shiraz just months before. And we're very fortunate to be in the same physical locality as these individuals. They have blessed this environment with their thoughts and their dreams. So I want to just take us away from Concord, and I want to try and give you a little bit of perspective. So this was the first picture taken by the Apollo 17 mission on its journey to the moon in 1972. It's called the Blue Marble. It's a photo we would all readily recognize. That's home, that's Earth. It's vast. It takes us a long time to get from one place to another. We moan about transatlantic travel. The Earth is huge. We can throw numbers at it. We can talk about its mass, its size, its radius. We can talk about its population, which is 7.5 billion. We can get lost in the economies of the world and feel overawed by the trillions of dollars that are moving around between countries. But really, we're a very small entity in the overall scheme of things. And what is the scheme of things? Well, we're the third rock from the sun. We know that. There was a show about that. This is our solar system. Pretty vast. It takes 8 minutes for a beam of light to make its way from the sun to the Earth. So the sun could blow up and we wouldn't know about it for 8 minutes. But it doesn't end there. The solar system sits within the Milky Way. You've probably all heard of the Milky Way. We are yet sure of Milky Way. What does that actually mean? Well, there's 100 to 400 billion planets in the Milky Way. We are one. The Milky Way itself is not the end of it. There's something called a local group that was named by Edwin Hubble of the telescope fame. And the local group is a series of galaxies. Well, that's not the end of it. I'll get back to that in a second. Someone asked NASA, how many stars are there in the universe? Stars. We have a star, it's called the sun. How many stars are there? Well, they said, fine, we're going to point our telescope at every deep recess of the universe, and we're going to count all the points of light that we see. This is our known universe. Each point here was representative of a galaxy. They found 10 billion. On average, there are about 100 billion stars in a galaxy. They estimated that there are 1 times 10 to the 21, or 1,000 trillion stars in the known universe. That is the same as all the grains of sand on every beach on Earth, with each one of them represented as sun. And this is where you start getting absolutely monumental. So we are part of the Milky Way. The Milky Way is part of the local cluster. The local cluster is one small part of what has been termed Laniakea, which is a Hawaiian term meaning immense heavens. We are infinitesimally small. And we debate and quarrel over the most menial things. But this is not to make us feel sad or lonely. This is to make us feel part of something vast. So the physical and spiritual reality. If I was to ask you, what is God? I'm sure we would have different responses. People would think about qualities and attributes and things that were good, and perhaps some people would think about things that were bad. It's confusing. And I wanted to share a couple of quotations from the Baha'i writings. The first one from the Baha'i. The one true God may be compared unto the sun, and the believer unto a mirror. No sooner is the mirror placed before the sun than it reflects its light. And the second from Baha'u'llah, O Son of Man, rejoice in the gladness of thine heart, that thou mayest be worthy to meet me and to mirror forth my beauty. So what is God? Well, God means different things to different people. But it cannot be explained. It cannot be put into words. God is in nature. The view that you would see as you walk through a beautiful field, gazing at the stupendous mountains. God is in nature throughout, amongst the animals. God is in the smile of the kids that we see around us. God is amongst all of us. And beyond that, God is every positive action we take. That is God. The kindly look, the holding the door for someone, the being gentle, the being kind and considerate. This is God. God permeates through all of us. It is part of our fabric. We should fix our thoughts on that which will sanctify the hearts and souls of men. This can best be achieved through pure and good holy deeds, through a virtuous life and a goodly behavior. Finally,